Nestled high in the embrace of the jagged Silver Peak Mountains lay a valley of emerald green, a haven of soft alpine grasses and bubbling brooks. Here lived a large, ancient herd of mountain goats, undisputed masters of the steep cliffs and lords of the highland meadows. Among them lived Silas. To any casual observer, Silas was a tragic, almost comical figure within the herd. He did not possess the pristine, snow-white coat of his peers. Instead, his fur was a mottled, stormy gray, thick and coarse. He did not have elegant, cloven hooves perfectly designed for gripping narrow rock ledges. Instead, he had massive, heavy paws with dull claws that clicked awkwardly and loudly against the stones. Silas was a timber wolf. But if you were to ask him, he would quickly lower his large head, flatten his rounded ears against his skull, and solemnly swear that he was simply a very ugly goat. His earliest memories were of Alara, a gentle, older female goat who had found him shivering in a hollowed-out log after a harsh spring blizzard. Pitying the strange, whimpering creature, she had taken him in and raised him as her own. She taught him the ways of the herd with endless patience. She taught him to graze, though the sweet alpine grass tasted like bitter ash on his tongue and his sharp, pointed teeth were utterly useless at grinding it. He suffered from chronic, agonizing stomach aches, believing it was simply a natural punishment for being a bad goat. "Chew slowly, Silas," Alara would coax gently, nudging his heavy shoulder with her soft snout. "You must grind the clover, not swallow it whole. You'll never grow strong horns if you don't eat your greens." Silas would try, his powerful jaw aching as he mashed the fibrous plants, desperately wishing for something, anything, that tasted different. He walked with a hunched, awkward gait, trying desperately to mimic the stiff-legged, bouncy trot of his adopted family. Because his body was biologically built for fluid, predatory sprinting, his earnest attempts at prancing only caused him to trip over his own large paws, earning the innocent but stinging laughter of the younger kids. Over time, Silas learned to shrink himself, to make his large, muscular frame appear as small and inconspicuous as possible. He believed, with every fiber of his being, that he was simply a defective, broken member of the flock who was lucky to be tolerated at all. The life of a mountain goat is dictated by a single, overwhelming emotion, fear. The world beyond the high cliffs was full of sharp teeth, sudden movements, and dark shadows, and the herd's only defense was constant vigilance and immediate flight. Silas absorbed this culture of terror into his very bones, wiring his brain to panic at the slightest provocation. Whenever a hawk screeched high overhead, the herd would freeze in unison, their rectangular pupils anxiously scanning the sky. Silas would freeze too, his heart hammering against his ribs in a chaotic, painful rhythm. Whenever the wind rustled the dark pine trees at the edge of the valley, the goats would scatter blindly, scrambling up the steep, rocky inclines to safety. Silas would dutifully follow, though his soft paws slipped dangerously on the loose shale and his lack of hooves made the vertical climbs agonizingly difficult. He often found himself lagging far behind, panting heavily, terrified that the imaginary monsters of the forest would emerge to drag him away into the dark. The herd's respected elder, a cantankerous old billy named Bramble with magnificent, spiraling horns, frequently scolded Silas for his noisy clumsiness. "You are a liability to this herd, boy," Bramble would snort, stamping a sharp hoof angrily into the dirt. "When the predators come, and they always come, your heavy feet will be the death of us all. You sound like a falling boulder when you run. A proper goat is silent. A proper goat is swift. You are clearly neither." Silas would lower his heavy head, his golden yellow eyes fixing shamefully on the dust. "I'm sorry, Elder Bramble," he would reply, trying to make his naturally deep, rumbling voice sound light and bleedy. The result was a strange, raspy cough that only irritated the elder further. "I will try to step lighter. I will try to be better." Deep down, a confusing, silent storm raged within Silas. Sometimes, when a plump marmot scurried across the meadow, Silas felt a strange, electric twitch in his powerful hind legs. A primal, suppressed urge to lower his head, lock his eyes on the target, and sprint with all his might would wash over him. But the very moment the feeling arose, overwhelming guilt and terror would quickly crush it. Goats did not chase things. Goats ran away. And so, Silas buried his deepest instincts under thick layers of shame, convincing himself that these urges were just another sign of his flawed, broken nature. He lived every single day wearing a heavy mask that suffocated him, a prisoner of a mind that constantly denied his own biological reality. The fragile illusion of Silas's life completely shattered on a crisp, cloudless afternoon in late autumn. The herd was grazing peacefully near the valley's vulnerable lower edge, lulled into a false sense of security by the unusually warm sun. Suddenly, the wind, which usually carried the scent of danger up from the valley floor, shifted abruptly. It grew cold, and with it came a smell that made the goat's blood run utterly cold, a musky, feral scent of pure, starving predatory intent. Before anyone could sound a warning alarm, the tall autumn grass parted violently, and a pack of 3 starving, desperate coyotes burst into the clearing. They were mangy and painfully thin, but their eyes burned with a frantic, lethal hunger. Absolute chaos erupted. The tranquil meadow instantly transformed into a theater of blind panic. Goats bleated in sheer terror, kicking up blinding clouds of dust as they scrambled frantically in every direction. Mothers desperately called for their lost kids, and the elders led a frantic, disorganized charge toward the sheer, vertical cliff faces where the coyotes could not possibly follow. Silas's mind went entirely blank. His adopted mother, Alara, was far across the field, already halfway up a steep rocky outcrop. "Silas! Run! Hurry!" she bleated, her voice cracking with absolute terror. Silas tried. He commanded his legs to move, to carry him up the safety of the rocks, but his soft paws slipped uselessly on the smooth, slate surfaces. He tumbled backward into the dirt. Blind panic seized him entirely. The coyotes, immediately noticing the large, clumsy, gray goat struggling pathetically at the base of the cliff, quickly changed their trajectory. They recognized weak, isolated prey. Instead of turning to face them, instead of utilizing his massive, bone-crushing jaws, his sheer intimidating size, and his undeniable physical strength, Silas desperately pressed his large body into a shallow, tight crevice beneath a large boulder. He squeezed his golden eyes shut, tucked his thick, bushy tail tightly between his legs, and began to tremble violently. He was significantly larger than all 3 coyotes combined, heavily endowed with the musculature of an apex predator, yet he cowered exactly like a newborn, helpless fawn. He waited for the inevitable, painful bite, his heart entirely resigning to his tragic fate. "This is it," he thought, paralyzed by the identity he had falsely claimed. "I am a slow, clumsy, useless goat, and now I will be eaten." But the tearing bite never came. Instead, the frantic yipping and snapping of the starving coyotes was suddenly eclipsed by a sound that seemed to make the very bedrock of the mountains vibrate. It was a low, thunderous, guttural growl, so incredibly deep and menacing that it rattled the loose stones around Silas's hiding place. Silas slowly opened one terrified eye. Standing squarely between him and the pack of coyotes was a creature unlike anything he had ever truly looked at. It was a massive, heavily battle-scarred alpha wolf named Vanguard. Vanguard's thick fur was the color of a starless midnight, his broad, heavy shoulders rippling with tightly coiled power. A jagged, silvery scar ran diagonally down his dark muzzle, a permanent testament to countless brutal battles fought and definitively won. Vanguard didn't even bother to snap or bite at the intruders. He simply stepped forward, his black lips curling back slowly to reveal terrifying rows of bone-crushing teeth, and unleashed a thunderous, earth-shaking bark. The coyotes, recognizing instantly and instinctively that they were hopelessly outmatched and outclassed, tucked their tails in defeat, scrambled frantically over themselves, and vanished back into the dark tree-line, whimpering in terror. The highland meadow fell deadly silent. The goats watched frozen from the safety of the high, inaccessible cliffs, holding their breath in terror of this new, much larger, much deadlier monster that had just saved them. Vanguard slowly turned around, his piercing, amber eyes scanning the rocky base until they landed squarely on the trembling, gray mass wedged pathetically beneath the boulder. He approached slowly, deliberately, his massive paws making absolutely no sound on the loose gravel. He lowered his huge, scarred head, sniffing Silas with a mixture of intense curiosity and profound, utter confusion. "Why?" Vanguard's voice was like grinding stones, deep and incredibly resonant. "Is the creature of the wolf pack cowering in the dirt like a frightened, pathetic meal?" Silas squeezed his eyes shut even tighter, shaking uncontrollably. Please don't eat me," he stammered, his voice pathetic, airy, and high-pitched. "I am a tough, stringy old goat. I would taste terrible." "I am a bad, slow goat." Vanguard paused. The heavy silence stretched for so long that Silas eventually dared to peek. The Alpha was staring down at him, not with hunger, but with a mixture of profound pity and absolute disbelief. Vanguard let out a short, huffing breath from his nose that might have been a laugh. "A goat?" Vanguard murmured, stepping back to take in the sheer absurdity of the sight. "You have been living a lie so deeply that you have forgotten how to open your own eyes. Get up." When Silas hesitated, still paralyzed by a lifetime of fear, Vanguard snapped his massive jaws with a sharp, echoing clack. "I said get up. And follow me." Silas dragged himself out from beneath the protective boulder, his long legs shaking so badly he could barely manage to stand upright. He didn't dare look up at the high cliffs where Elara and the rest of the herd watched in silent, paralyzed horror. He kept his heavy head bowed low, his tail tucked tight against his belly in submission, and nervously followed the massive black wolf into the dark, intimidating canopy of the surrounding pine forest. They walked in silence for what felt like hours. For Silas, every shifting shadow held a new terror, but Vanguard moved through the dense woods like he owned them. The thick underbrush seemed to part willingly for him, the forest inherently respected him. Slowly, despite his overwhelming fear, Silas began to notice something incredibly strange. When he stopped actively trying to bounce on his toes like a goat, and instead naturally mirrored Vanguard's long, fluid, loping strides, his own paws stopped hurting entirely. The awkward, heavy clumsiness that had plagued his entire existence began to melt away, quickly replaced by a strange, silent grace he never knew he possessed. Eventually, the dense trees opened up to reveal a hidden, pristine alpine lake. The deep water was crystal clear, perfectly still, and undisturbed by even the slightest breeze. It acted as a flawless, natural mirror reflecting the towering, snow-capped silver peaks and the endless blue expanse of the sky. Vanguard stopped right at the water's edge and looked back over his shoulder at Silas. "Drink," he commanded softly yet firmly. Silas, heavily parched from fear and physical exhaustion, cautiously approached the water on trembling legs. He leaned his large, heavy head forward over the glassy surface to take a sip. Suddenly, he froze entirely. The breath caught sharply in his throat. He stared intently at the water, blinked hard, and stared again. Looking back at him was not a clumsy goat with a squarish muzzle and weird, rectangular pupils. Looking back at him was a majestic creature with sharp, highly intelligent golden eyes. A creature with a broad, incredibly powerful snout, thick, muscular shoulders, and pointed, perfectly alert ears. For the very first time in his life, Silas truly saw himself. "Look closely at your jaw," Vanguard said, stepping up quietly beside him so their two reflections stood side by side in the still water. "Those are not the flat teeth of a grazer. Look at your broad chest. That is the deep chest of a tireless hunter, built for incredible endurance. You are not prey, my young friend. You never were." Silas continued to stare at his reflection, a profound, agonizing shock washing over his entire being. The years of chronic stomach aches, the embarrassing, clumsy stumbling, the agonizing daily fear, the desperate, constant need to make himself smaller, it all rushed rapidly through his mind. He hadn't failed at being a goat. He had simply been a wolf all along. You have lived your whole life hiding in the deep shadow of other people's fears, Vanguard said quietly, his resonant voice carrying the heavy weight of ancient, undeniable wisdom. They taught you to run blindly because that is all they know how to do. But your great strength was never absent. It was only sleeping, buried deeply beneath a fictional story you were told, a story you foolishly chose to believe. Something ancient, wild, and undeniable stirred deep within Silas's chest. It was a spreading warmth that began in his expansive lungs and traveled down into his powerful, heavy paws. The overwhelming fear that had aggressively ruled his heart for his entire life began to rapidly evaporate, quickly replaced by a surging, undeniable sense of power and belonging. "No!" Vanguard commanded, his amber eyes flashing with intense light. "Speak with your true voice." Silas tentatively opened his mouth. At first, years of strict habit took over, and a pathetic, raspy, goat-like squeak escaped his throat. "No!" Vanguard growled deeply. "Dig much deeper. Pull it from your blood. Pull it from the earth beneath your feet." Silas closed his golden eyes. He felt the solid, unyielding rock beneath his wide paws. He felt the crisp, cold mountain air filling his incredibly deep lungs. He threw his heavy head back toward the endless sky, opened his jaws wide, and let it out. A howl ripped from his throat, a long, soaring, breathtakingly beautiful sound that loudly echoed off the high mountains and resonated powerfully through the entire valley. It was a mournful song of deep sorrow for the countless years lost to fear, and a fierce song of absolute triumph for the truth finally found. Up on the distant cliffs, the goats heard the wild sound and shivered in terror. But Silas did not care. For the very first time in his life, he did not want to hide. This story is not just about a lost wolf in the highlands. It is a mirror for you. How often do you walk through life hunched over, hiding your unique talents, and silencing your own voice simply because you were placed in an environment that didn't understand your true strength? How many times have you firmly believed you were weak, or incapable, simply because you were unfairly comparing yourself to those who were built entirely differently? Deep inside you, buried safely beneath the doubts, the anxieties, and the rigid fears imposed by others, there is a powerful roar, a wild howl eagerly waiting to be released. The exact moment you stop believing the false stories and boldly recognize who you truly are, everything changes. You will never cower in the shadows again.